we're the main target because we're so visible, because we're there, and because we support what the Islamists regard as the main enemy of Muslims, which is Israel and the Arab police states. So the idea of disengagement is beneficial in two respects. It allows us to stop bleeding and paying, and it refocuses Muslims on their true enemy. And I think that's the best we can hope for.
Well, so now that it's too late, now that we've blown it all this time, it sounds like what you're saying is perhaps the choice is not between war and total war, but between peace and total war, and that, you know, these people are, if they truly are doomed without us as the enemy for them to point at, then we can just call this thing off, and individual justice for bin Laden and Zawahiri, who both obviously deserve to be hung, aside, you know, if we pretend they're ahead of a state that we would accept a surrender from or a negotiation with or something like that, we can basically just end this by rolling back our empire.
Well, to some extent, we can. Our choice is in our own hands. But before we can do any disengagement, Scott, we have to do something about energy. Energy is the key to the whole problem. As long as we and our allies are dependent on Persian Gulf energy as kind of the swing producer in the world, and as long as we encourage the Saudis to keep buying up our national debt, there's no way we can escape their thrall. And until we do that, we're stuck in the Middle East, almost precisely as we are now. And so, to me, we can talk a lot about things. There's a lot of possible solutions, but it all starts with energy.
All right. Well, now, I'm a libertarian, but I'm not really much of an Austrian economist, but I know that they would all say that that's just not true, that actually that no matter what happens, the oil will be for sale, the price is not going to really vary that much, certainly not any more than when we wage war over there, and that if anything, the reason we would need any sort of military presence over there to protect our oil is to make sure which companies are doing the pumping and the skimming off the top, not just to guarantee that the oil gets to market, because the oil will get to market.
Well, that's probably an economic argument that holds some water, but it kind of depends on how many American lives you want to pay per gallon. You know, it's not just Arab oil we're going to fight for in the future, but we're going to fight for African oil. We're going to get 20% of our crude out of the Gulf of Guinea in 2012, and if you think Iraq is a nightmare, wait till you try to fight in 27,000 square kilometers of swamp and forest in the Gulf of Guinea.
Yeah, the Gulf of Guinea, is that Nigeria you're talking about?
Yes. The Niger Delta.
Yeah, well, that's a problem we've begun to cover. Do you think, Mike, that to a large degree this terror war is just being co-opted to fight an energy war?
You know, I don't know what the answer is to that, Scott. But I also don't see anyone out there who has any objection to the continued American dependence on unstable sources of energy. The problem with most economists is that their economic laws are probably true, but they're a little bit irrelevant to the parents of soldiers who are dying to get oil for us.
Right. Well, you were the guy who quoted bin Laden himself, you know, in the, a million years wildest fantasy of him actually being the dictator in charge, that even bin Laden himself said that, look, we can't drink it. We'll sell it to you.
Well, if you remember, one of the things the Clinton administration said is we can never deal with these people because they want oil to be $100 a barrel. I think it's $114 today.
Yeah. I didn't check the price, but it's certainly over $100, no doubt about that.
So it's, this is a problem, and we don't talk about it. It's not a good election issue. It's like Israel or having to admit that Americans are dying to make sure that the Saudis can steal their country blind. All of these things need to be talked about, but it's not going to happen in this presidential cycle.
Yeah, it looks like that time has passed. As you pointed out, though, this really was a good one for that while it lasted.
Yes.
Now,
what's surprising me. I've since my book came out, I've done a lot of talking in colleges, and I've been really surprised by the number of young people who were very staunch supporters of Dr. Paul, and I think that's a good sign for America in the future.
Mm-hmm. And now, by the way, I'm sorry I didn't mention it. The new book is Marching Toward Hell. I haven't read it yet. It's The Future of American Islam, something like that?
It's called Marching Toward Hell, American Islam After Iraq.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I can't wait to get a copy of that. Imperial Hubris, for anybody who hasn't read it, you got to run out and get it. Let's talk about Dick Cheney and the threat of an Islamo-fascist caliphate ruling all the land from Spain to Indonesia based out of their oil-producing base in Iraq after in the event of an American withdrawal. Now,
I think his pacemaker set at the wrong speed.
All right, well, now, so tell me why that is. Tell me, obviously, it's your opinion that that's ridiculous, but so why is it ridiculous that Al-Qaeda in Iraq could fill the power vacuum left by the United States and use that to take over the world?
Well, Al-Qaeda is never going to rule Iraq. Whether it's the current government or the insurgents who eventually come out on top, Iraqis are going to rule Iraq. It's only in Mr. Bush's mind and Mr. Cheney's mind and the rest of the neoconservatives that somehow Al-Qaeda ever had a chance to rule Iraq. Al-Qaeda was there as a complement to the Iraqi insurgents who were fighting us. In the first instance, they were never the main opponent. And in the second instance, they were there to establish safe haven so they could reach into the Levant, into Jordan, into Syria, into Lebanon, and then eventually into Israel, and that's what they've succeeded in doing. But, I think this is a point at which either the American general staff are not doing their part or Cheney and Bush ignore them. Because anyone can tell you that a foreign element is never going to win an insurgency in a country where they are not home based. It just doesn't happen. Whoever wins in Iraq will be an Iraqi, not an Al-Qaeda person.
It is notable that Dick Cheney's militia, the U.S. Marine Corps, and the U.S. Army, and the most powerful military force in the history of the world cannot rule Iraq. How the hell could a couple of thousand Egyptians and Saudis on foot, with sandals and prayers take over the place?
Well, eventually the Iraqis will rule their own country. Clearly, the Al-Qaeda guys, the foreign fighters, whoever else is in there, are not going to rule Iraq. It's just nonsense. But here you see just the absolute futility of much of the American press. The New York Times, the Washington Post, they're not going to call Cheney on this in interviews he's going to go and talk to the Fox News Network and they're going to lap up this crap that he says, and anybody with any knowledge of history knows that it's completely false. But now it becomes kind of writ, and we proceed, and the American people are convinced that Al-Qaeda is going to raise its banner over Baghdad.
Mm-hmm. Well, John McCain has accused Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama both of wanting to raise the white flag to Al-Qaeda, and I noticed that Barack Obama answered that, Al-Qaeda wasn't in Iraq before the war, which I know you proved as a CIA employee, as we've talked about in the past.
Yes.
But he was not able to come up with what you and I just discussed, that give me a break. Al-Qaeda in Iraq is never going to take over anything. Barack Obama doesn't know as much about it, as we talk about every day on this show.
I think that's probably right. But I think the truth of the matter is that this is all sparring for election points. No one is going to withdraw from Iraq. McCain told an Israeli paper last week that if the U.S. withdrew from Iraq, it would compromise Israeli security. And whether it's McCain or Obama or Clinton, they're all pledged to support and protect Israel to the last drop of American blood. And 4 years from today, we're going to be in Iraq just as we are today, maybe even more so. So the whole discussion of Iraq in this election is just a kind of useless exercise because they're all staying for the next 4 years.
And you think that the reason for all of this is the central issue here for all of these candidates is Israel and what's good for that state, not this one or Iraq?
Without question. Without question. And this goes back again to the media. No one has ever asked, why would anybody believe that if the invasion worked, we got rid of Saddam, we established a new government, that the new government would be pro-Israel?
Well, they told them that they'd get a Hashemite king, right, like they have in Jordan.
Yeah, well, that was kind of a fantasy too. But what government can survive in Iraq if it's pro-Israeli?